Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to be interviewing a very good friend of Gavin. And basically, we're going to be asking him questions about his first deal, and he'll be answering authentically. None of these questions have been rehearsed. So before we even get started, make sure you hit the subscribe button and follow us. All right, Gavin, take it away.
Yeah. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, Holly and I are both business partners, family friends, but the reason we're doing this is to provide a platform for individuals who may not be as well versed in real estate investing or even starting their journey. So, our goal is to help those answer questions that they may not have answered, and what we're doing is creating a series of interviews of those who have been investors in real estate, who have life experience, who may have something to add to the conversation. And we're starting off with a bunch of people from my perspective who we've interviewed so far, even if they're not up yet, those individuals who've been in the game prior to myself. So we just want to ensure that you're hearing the game from the same individuals who coached us into being where we are today. One of my first questions includes, how did you get started and what made you embark on the journey?
Good, awesome. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. My name is Askia Abdul for anyone that's watching. Yeah, no, it goes all the way back to 2008. So those of you that are old enough to remember 2008, everyone was losing their jobs. The financial crisis just hit. I was in my career for roughly about 4 years at that time in finance. And I saw the market turning, right, and everything that was going on. So at that time, me and my buddy, his name was Flip, we was like, hey, listen, we have these builders out in Delaware. Let's approach them because right now everything's at rock bottom, and let's see if we can work out some deals. So we literally went to them and was like, listen, we'll get 4 homes right now. You're not moving these things. And there was no homes, right? These were just plots of land. But we'll do 4 if you give us a deal across all 4. And at that time, prior to the financial crisis, the homes were going for like 250 each. 3-story townhomes, 2,500 square feet, so decent sizes. And we were able to work out a deal to get each one for 175. So we were like, listen, let's go, let's get them built. And that was sort of my first walk into real estate. We used FHA loans to do everything right at that time because we were still young in our careers. We didn't have the money, so we did the 3.5% down. And that was sort of the experience, right? We built it from the ground up, so we didn't have to worry about repairs and all of that. So it was a very interesting start. And that was the beginning. So most people traditionally go out and buy like a home that's already built. This was a way to get in without having to worry about the back end, fixing things up and stuff like that. And how we started. Yeah.
So how did you guys even get to that point? Like, y'all just like, did someone come approach you guys and say, hey, we have this land that we're planning on building. Do you want it
Yeah,
fast?
so
Like,
interesting. Yeah, so we've always talked about real estate, but we didn't know where to start, right? Like most people, right? And back then there was no social media, right? So you're trying to figure out ways. We were looking in Philadelphia, but the areas we were looking in were the hoods of the hoods, right? And me just not being from Philly and from New York, I'm like, you know what? I don't know enough about it. There's too many people on the block. But Delaware was the sweet spot where you had people from New York, Philly, Baltimore, everyone moving, the jobs were booming. Um, and we were trying to find a location where there was growth. Anytime you see a hospital being built, highways being built, Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart,
mm,
all of that was coming in all at the same time. And we was like, you know what? We think this might be a shot. Now, at that time, we didn't know nothing about real estate, right? So this was all things we were just assuming, right?
mm,
Had no clue if it was gonna work. Um, and then we was like, listen, let's just go for it. What's the worst that can happen, right? We lose
mm.
some money. At that time we worked in finance and the credit card space. So we was like, if it don't work, our credit gets shot, but we can rebuild it. So let's just go at it. So we cleared out our 401ks and we put those down payments down and we started.
Okay. So just to get a little more glimpse of your background, I know you started at your career point, but what was your upbringing? Like, did your parents talk about financial literacy? Like, did they educate you on like real estate? Like, how was your mind developed as a child cultivated, you know?
And now, so my parents were poor, right? You're talking about 15 siblings between my mom and my dad and my stepmom.
Mm.
Um, investing investing wasn't even a thing because we didn't have no money to invest, right? So really what it was for me is I went to boarding school overseas in Africa, and I got to see what wealth really looked like. Not necessarily real estate, but wealth. And I mean like extreme, extreme wealth, like coming to America stuff.
Yeah.
So when I came back, we had lost our home. We were homeless for a number of years, so throughout junior high school and high school. And I kept saying to myself, I was like, listen, I can't go back. I've seen too much, right? I was exposed to things. So I was always looking for ways to make money. And one thing that stuck with me is growing up in Brooklyn, you saw people who own brownstones and other homes, they were killing it, right? They never really had issues with money, right? I did never really knew what they did or anything, but I just knew the kids were always fine. They always had the fresh sneakers. So it was like, you know what? I need to look into that a little more. Um, and then right before the financial crisis, real estate was just booming everywhere in the country, right? Everyone was just buying up everything. So I started to pay attention at that point, right? But again, had no clue. All I knew is that people were buying homes, cashing out for 100 grand, 400 grand here and there, and they were selling garbage, right? So I was like, okay, let me try to get in. And I was gonna get in 2007 with my aunt. She found a multifamily, 600,000 in Queens. It was a terrible deal, but I
Mm.
didn't know. The only good thing for me is we just didn't have enough money to put down on account on it for a deposit. So it actually worked out in my favor because that would have just it would have wiped me out, right?
Let's put
Yeah.
that in
Um,
perspective. Let's put that in perspective. A terrible deal. Why and how? Because today you can't find a multi-fam for 600 in
yeah,
Queens.
so during that time, the reason it was a bad deal because everything was super inflated, right? There was no value in any of these homes at that point in time. People were just giving out loans, right? They weren't looking at the homes, they didn't care about the community, any development, nothing like that. Now, hindsight, if I would have bought that, it would have been paying for probably about 10 years, and then eventually it would have rolled into something good. But 10 years in real estate is a long time, man. You don't want to take an
Mhm.
L on something for that long. But that's really what it was. So like now home prices are inflated, but there's true value there, right? You can pull that value out. People are keeping those home prices up. People are buying those homes at those prices. Back then, it was just all paperwork just to inflate home values.
So, Ak, I want to ask you because you're a very smart individual, you're a very calculated individual. And although you made the decision back then, do you still feel the same way about it being overvalued? The reason I
I
ask you that now is because everyone trying to get into real estate now who's not in, they're looking at the prices, probably feeling the same way. So if you could go back 15, 20 years, how would you feel?
so I still feel 2006, 2007, yes, it was inflated, right? Completely overvalued. And I'll sort of talk about the difference between then and now. Back then, everyone was overvaluing their properties. People actually couldn't afford the properties. They didn't have the income to afford it. They didn't have the buyers, right? Everything was literally paperwork, right? And when I say paperwork, there was no substance on the back end of these values, right? The communities weren't being gentrified at that point. There was no community development at that point. Versus fast forward
Fact.
now, and I'll use Brooklyn as a standpoint for people who are from New York, is Brooklyn now has so much development. The jobs are there, right? The buildings are there. They're building infrastructure. So back to what I was saying before, in 2006, there was no infrastructure being built. But now all of the infrastructure is being built, right? There's jobs there, there's schools being built. So you see the real value in the homes. And then on top of that, as rates start to move, the values of the home, they're still going up and people are still buying, right? It's not like this is like fake money where it's just being done on paper. People can actually afford the homes that they're buying. And
Mm.
foreclosures are really low. So that's another big thing. So yeah. But I think there's always there's a buying real estate, there's always a market, right? There's never a bad time to buy. I think there's just a wrong location to buy, right?
Mm.
There's always going to be a market, especially depending on your price point, to go in and buy real estate, regardless of what's going on in the country or around the market. You just got to find the right location.
How
Yep.
are you comfortable with sharing your financial approach to buying your first purchase? How'd you get
Yeah.
there? How'd you start? What was the timeline like?
So I started my career in finance in like 2003. So at that time, I'm living in Delaware. Delaware is super cheap compared to New York, and I'm saving this money. I had no clue what to do with it. Due to popular belief, most people in finance, they don't really know how to manage their own money, right? So you, you're making the money, but you're like, what am I going to do with it? So at that time, it was like, hey, I need to show people back home, and this was really sort of like an ego thing for me. I wanted to show people at home that like I was doing it, right? So I was like, all right, let me try to figure out ways to get into things. So I looked at barbershops, other businesses, prepaid legal. I was just trying to find all types of ways to just get other income. But the real estate thing, in Delaware during that time, there was so much land and there was homes
Stop,
being built
stop,
there.
stop. You jumped. Because right now you're talking about New York. You're from New York. We mentioned
Yeah.
Jersey and you mentioned Delaware. So for the listeners, that came out of nowhere. So how did that even come about?
So how did I end up? I ended up in Delaware because I landed there right after school. That's where
Okay.
my first job was out of school. It was affordable to live. It was sort of ripe for anyone coming out of school that wanted to make good money, have a good foundation. Everything was sort of set up right.
More
Um,
importantly, know where you're investing, right?
Correct. Absolutely. And everybody owned homes in Delaware, right?
Mm.
So that was a big thing where growing up in New York, nobody owned anything at that age, right? You didn't own a car, you didn't own nothing. You owned a Metro card. In Delaware, when you graduated high school, you owned a car. When you graduated college, you bought a house. And
Wow.
it was amazing to me. I'm like, oh wow, they're really established out here. Like I gotta figure this out. And that was sort of the glimpse into it. At that time, I probably had about maybe 30 grand saved up in my 401k. I thought it was a lot of money at that time. I thought it was, I could just buy an entire block type thing, but very quickly realize it's not that much. And I got with my guy, Flip, and we're like, listen, we're gonna go in and negotiate these deals. And we have to use the FHA, right? Because we can only do the 3.5% down. But we need to work out a deal where we can get multiple properties, right? Because this is the only time we're going to be able to do this. So we were very clear, like, listen, we have limited money, we have to make it work. We didn't even know if we were going to rent it out, flip it, anything. It was just buy the house and figure it out afterwards. I wouldn't
Mm.
recommend that today, but that was the honest approach, right? We didn't know what we were doing. Um, we didn't know anything about permits, building, nothing, right? So we signed the papers, had no clue what was going on, and then they call us and they're like, "Hey, we need you to come to the site. We need to start doing plans. You have to pick out everything for the house." I was terrible at that, right? So keep in mind if you ever do a new build, it's a lot of work. You got to pick out a lot of things. So make sure you have the personality for that. Um, and what happened is I went over budget because they set a
Mm.
budget and I completely went over budget. And my buddy didn't. He was like, give me the most basic things you got. And I'm like, nah, I want, nice, cabinets and all of that stainless steel. Again, no experience, right?
You fell in love with
Um,
the project.
yeah, I fell in love with it. But hindsight, right? The funny part is it all worked out to my favor because what happened is I became the
Equity,
most house on the block.
yeah, equity. Yep.
So when it came to renting, um, I it took me about a year to build the house. I had tenants within 6 months, locked in, ready to go. I never lived in the house.
Top
The
of the
lease was
market.
signed.
Top of the
Huh?
market rent.
Yes. Now, so Delaware rent is
Because
low.
you said
So
6 months, and to the person who's listening, that might sound like a long time to
So
rent the
6 months
house.
after it was built or 6 months before?
no. So 6 months into the build, I
Oh,
had someone
okay.
in the rent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Because it
nice.
sounded like you built it, and then 6 months later you got a tenant. So just to be clear,
Oh no. Yeah, 6 months prior to it being done and me handing over the keys, I had a lease locked in.
you said six
Um,
months prior.
yes.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a
that's
different
nice.
story. No,
Wait,
that's
so were
whole
you still
different.
renting while you had this lease going on, or were you living at home?
Uh, yeah, so I was renting and I was
Okay.
renting a really expensive college so I couldn't get approved for other places. So I had to live on a college campus in Delaware, which not the college that I went to. And they overcharged. So you got like a room and you had a shared space, sort of like a college dorm.
Yeah.
So I was living and then just pumping everything I had into this house, into these houses. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so had the lease signed. Um, and to just talk about that for a second, my philosophy on renting to people, I love single moms with school age kids.
Mhm.
Um,
Why is
if
that?
you're in a if you're in a good neighborhood with good schools, a single mom with school age kids will stay in that house and take care of that house to make sure that their kids are educated in a good school district.
Hmm.
That's always been my experience. When I stepped away from that formula, I started to have issues. Yeah, no, so like that always works out well because mothers they want their kids in good school districts, right? And then at the very least they're going to stay there during the school year, right? They're not moving out. So you can sort of foresee if they're going to move, it's usually going to be during the summertime. So you can sort of plan ahead and be prepared if that ever happens. Um, and you set the rent at a fair rate, right? Now, some people don't agree with this, right? I locked in the rent probably for about 5 years and never touched it. Right. Now, some people are like, hey, you should have increased it every single year because it's a business. But when I looked at the cost to flip the house versus that increase, it wasn't even on par, right? The cost to flip the house and
Mhm.
repaint and carpet and all of that was so much more. So I'm like, listen, I'm not gonna keep bumping up her rent every year, $50 here,
When
fifty
you say
dollars there.
flip, when you say flip the house, you don't actually mean selling the house. You mean waiting to rent to someone else, right?
To turn it over. Yeah.
Yeah.
To turn over the house. Yeah. So that was my initial approach. Again, I had no clue what I was doing, so this was a lot of just thinking things
Let's
through.
stop. But I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop. When he gives you a key, G's, dogs, women, queens, kings, there's a reason why that's beneficial. Now, a lot of people might say that's not smart. But here's the thing. The turnover doesn't, it's you're not guaranteed to have a turnover in the month. I've sat on units for 6 months before turning them over because I wanted a certain rent. Now, not everybody's in that same financial position. I wasn't the type in my mind to say, hey, I'll sit on something for X amount of months. I'm at a different place now. You have to figure out where you are in your investment process because there are some people who may have over 30 units and I'd rather wait to have the tenant that I want. But if you only have 5 units, 3 units, then don't play those games. If you have somebody who's going to lock in and you know they're going to pay that mortgage, I ain't stuttering. You know they're gonna pay that mortgage because their rent is gonna cost more than that mortgage. Then you lock in and you move on from there. I'll stop. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, so that's right? Like it's better to have somebody in there because vacancy costs and turnover costs, a high. It can literally wipe out your profits for a year plus time, right? So it's not worth that increase, right? But like you said, if you're dealing with, you have a mass portfolio, that's a whole different ball game,
Yeah,
right?
it's different. It's different.
Yeah,
You better listen to him. I listen to him and got here. I lose
yeah,
perspective, which is why this is so important, which is why it's important for us because you're gonna see Askia again because he invests in other areas of commercial real estate. But for this series, we're gonna focus on the first deal.
yeah. Um, so yeah, so we did that. It was great. Got that locked in. Like I said, we bought 4 properties, so he had 2, I had 2. They were all literally on the same block.
Who's who?
Um,
Who's we, and what made you comfortable enough to deal with them?
so his name is Flip. Well, that's what we call him, right? We went to school together, best friend of mine.
Be good with
Um,
aliases. We don't know who we're
and
listening and watching. We good with aliases.
yeah, no, so his real name is Flavius,
No,
which
no,
is
no,
like
no,
the
no. You don't gotta tell us that we good with aliases. We good. Go ahead, keep going.
okay, so yeah, no, so we locked in, man. And to be honest, if it wasn't for him, I would have never pulled the trigger, right? So I'm good at analyzing stuff, but I'm not the deal guy. I'm not the one who comes forward with deals, right? In anything I do, right? I'm the guy that everyone comes to and like, hey, I'm trying to do this, and I'll sit there and I'll analyze the heck out of something, right? So we did that, and everything got rented out, and it was great. I would say my first tenant, single mom, kids. She eventually got married, and she moved out, I think about 5 or 7 years later.
Wow.
Took care of the house. House was in tip-top shape. One thing I think is super important on your first deal, as a landlord, if you're going to be a landlord, you have to provide a level of service that's way above anything that they've ever experienced, right? So part of that is one, making sure that everything around the house is good and fixing things before they break, right? A lot of landlords, they're like, we'll just wait until they call us. No, go in, look at the house. If you see an issue, fix it ahead of time. Your tenant is going to love that, appreciate that, and they're going to see the value in that, right? That you're taking care of the property. They're going to take care of the property in most cases, right? You're always going to have exceptions. But I think that's super important that a lot of us miss the point on up front. And I only know that because I lived with slumlords growing up, right? Where they never fixed anything until it was like just too late. Um, so that was a big thing. And then two, I prefer this. So when I think about commercial real estate, you have what you call a triple net lease, where
Whoa,
your
whoa,
tenants,
whoa, whoa, whoa,
I know
whoa,
I'm throwing out some
Gavin.
numbers.
whoa, whoa.
Gavin got you on a short list today.
Let's take a couple of steps back. That is
All
too
right,
advanced. I'd like to ask you a follow-up question on how
go ahead.
did the former landlords in your life cultivate who you are for your tenants?
So my experience with landlords were twofold. With my mom, and my dad, landlords, they came to collect the rent and they never fixed anything on the first, second, fifth time, right? They would just come and patch things up. And when I say literally patch, they'll patch something up, they won't paint it, they'll leave out, it start leaking, a few months later. And that's always been my experience, right? Growing up in New York City. But on the other hand, my aunt, she was in a pre-war nice building in Brooklyn. Her landlord lived right next door. So he was so proactive at always making sure everyone in the building was good, right? If there were any issues, he came in. So I got to see the contrast between a good landlord and a terrible one. The landlords that with my mom, my dad, they didn't live in the building, right? They just popped up to collect the rent and they sent people to fix things. They never even fixed it themselves. This guy, he actually lived in the building. I don't think he owned the building, but whoever hired him, they was like, hey, live here and take care of everything. So you saw him cleaning. The building was immaculate. He didn't allow people to just loiter and things like that. He fixed everything. So seeing that, I was like, okay, you know what? My aunt's been living here for like 20 plus years and she loves it. That needs to be what I model in this experience. Yeah. Let me add something to that, and especially for first-time investors. Being a landlord, if it's not your thing, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
Find a rental
yeah,
management,
yeah, absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
I think that's a lot of times people get stuck and they're like, hey, I need to be involved. But it's not for everyone, right? So
Here's
it's
the thing.
perfectly fine to
Here's
say,
what you're not saying. Here's the balance. A lot of you individuals get into buying your first one, two, three rentals and think you're a boss, and you're not. And you're not even getting money like that. And you want to impress the other people in your life to make it seem like you're doing something. When the truth is, if you had real people in your corner like Askia to sit you down as Gavin Adams, you're not really doing it the way you think you're doing it. So some of y'all need to just sit back and treat your tenants good because they're your clients. And without your clients, you won't be able to pay that mortgage. And without that mortgage, you won't be able to talk that talk. So chill out, grow, and then once you grow, you realize it's best to treat people well because those are the people paying your mortgages. I'll digress. Go ahead, Fred.
yeah, no, so the other thing too, right, is that a lot of people are just not good at managing things, right? So if you're not good at you have to sort of do a self-evaluation. If you're not good at managing your own finances or managing your own house, right? You're not going to be good at managing a real estate portfolio, right? So you can hire people to do that. Um, and a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to give up that 5% or that 7%. If you worked your deal properly, you should have 5 or 7% to give up. So then you can sleep at night and have peace and quiet, right? And I'll tell a quick story about that.
Hello.
So again, I had these homes built, so no maintenance, nothing, everything's under warranty. 2 years in, on Christmas Eve, right? A pipe burst. And my rental company, they call me and they're like, hey, just want to let you know the pipe burst. And immediately I look over and I'm like, Dag, I got to go down to Delaware. And they're like, no, 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 that's not why we're calling you. We're just calling you to notify you. We're taking care of everything. We're going to get everything cleaned up. We're going to buy everything from Home Depot, whatever we can take back, we're going to take back to maximize for you everything. And that was the day I realized the value of having other people do things for a fee, so then I can have quality time to do whatever I want, right? Because prior to that, I was about to just cancel them because I'm like, listen, I'm paying them this fee every month and I'm not getting nothing. All they're doing is collecting a check and then depositing it back into my account. Um, but it's worth the effort, right? Now, keep in mind, all rental property management companies are not the same. They're not created equal. So I would say definitely make sure you're looking at references, you're speaking to people, just don't randomly go with someone. But it allows you to continue to live your life and make money to focus on your next deal and not worry about that deal.
What advice would you give them? Because it took
What you
me,
said?
what advice would you give them? Because it took me 5 years to figure out the game. And if you're not willing to look, like you said, it's either you built for this or you're not. And it took me 5 years of taking losses to get to where I am. And that's only because I had individuals like you in my corner, Taylor in my corner, and other people, other frat brothers and mentors to say, hey, if your head is above water and you're still surviving, then you're winning. Not everybody has individuals in their corner like you, like I've been grateful to have, blessed to have. So, what type of advice would you give individuals dealing with that, right? Because that's another thing that you said sometimes we take for granted, but not everyone has the network we have.
Got it. So I would say two main things. One, you just have to execute. You have to just take the chance, a leap of faith. The worst thing that can ever happen from buying real estate is you lose the home. Okay, you lose the home, you build back up again, right? And I know that might sound very nonchalant, right? But the reality is that people think about the worst case scenario before they even execute on a deal.
Well,
And they
people
sort of
lose
talk
money
themselves.
in the stock market every day.
Yeah, well, so it's because the stock market is more of a gambler. If you have a gambling mentality, it's easier to do than to go buy something that you have to actually put work into and work, right? Um, but I would say execute on a deal. Find a deal, research it. There's a ton of resources. I like to use Big Pocket. Bigger Pockets, I think that's the name of the website, but they have a whole like tool on there that helps out. And I would say start there. Find a deal that's affordable for you in a neighborhood that you know and understand, and just go for it. If you are under 30 years old, I promise you, the worst thing that can happen is you lose it and you start from scratch. But you have so much time to rebuild and do things. So you have to execute while you're younger, versus if you're in your 50s, I would say, okay, be a little more thoughtful in your approach, right? So that's the, for me, that's the number one thing is, right, just actually going out, finding a property and executing on it. Stop talking about it with your friends, right? Just go buy the property. And you don't have to do it with a whole people, right? Just go lock it in. Sign the work. And if you can do if you could be in a position where you can
Who
live in
should
a
you
multi
who should you talk to about
about buying a property,
it? Service road exit only is where I'm going? Yes, ma'am.
I would say two people. Find someone who's already in the space, right? Whether they're doing big or not, is going to be very transparent with you. And then find the person that's in your circle that has always been a cheerleader for you.
That's
Under
right.
all circles, right?
Talk about
Even
it.
they don't have to know real estate, but that person is going to breathe life into you no matter what you're going through, right? So I would say those are two people, right? Someone who's in the space so you can understand the pitfalls and not make the same mistakes. And then the person who's in your corner all the time, that's your biggest cheerleader. That's the person you want to tell, not not the other people that's like, oh, now you don't want to do this now, prices are high and rates are high. No, because they don't have the foresight in what you're doing.
So don't talk to people who will never accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Right. Because there's a lot of naysayers, and there'll be a lot more people to tell you not to do something because they've never done it, instead of people to tell you what to do because they have done it. And value those individuals who are going to champion you, even if they haven't accomplished it, because they believe in you as much as you should believe in yourself. And if you're going to be risking your own bread, then the truth is you should know what you're doing before you do it. You don't really need anybody else's approval. Sometimes it's great to have a voice of support. It's one thing to ask, but it's another thing to spend your own money.
100%. 100%. So I would definitely say that's the focus. Find those two people, and just execute on the deal. Go find a realtor. Don't find any realtor, by the way. Let's talk about that real quick for a second. All realtors are not crazy, right? You want to find a that is like about working for you, right? A lot of realtors, they collect the paycheck, but they don't actually do the work. You go out and do all the work, and then they just help you do the paperwork. You want a realtor that has experience in that space with finding rental properties, and they're actually going to mentor you through that first process. You should be asking every question you could think of about that paperwork. Don't just sign stuff, just so you can educate yourself along the path. And then every deal you do, your knowledge base is just going to increase over time.
So let me ask you, I already know what it was for you, and you spoke on purchasing your first property, but I also know that you have additional properties. What role will or did your first property play in purchasing future properties?
The To be honest, the first one didn't really, the first one was sort of like, hey, get with my guy, let's go do this. We didn't have the vision to see how far like we can take it. I wish I did, right? Because things would be very different now, as with most people. The second property was more, or the second investment was more of a strategic thing. And that's when I was like, okay, now I'm trying to build something here, right? I'm trying to utilize this for something. And the goal of that was not to make me rich, it was for my kids. I saw how expensive it was, that things were getting. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to buy properties for each one of my kids that I'm never going to try to get as much rent out of it. It's all about appreciation. So this wasn't an income play, it was appreciation. So when they get to a certain age, they can liquidate it for college or liquidate it to start a business or whatever they choose to, it will be gifted to them. So it was a very different mindset from the second time from the first time, right? The first time was sort of, hey, let's go out and do this. We're going to be investors. And like I said, you want to show off a little bit. But the second time was all about legacy for the family. And if anything went wrong, they have some money. And I would say every investor, you should be looking at two things: income and appreciation. Sometimes it's hard to get both, depending on the that you're going to
You
be
said
in.
every week?
No. Every new investor
Did you say
should
every
look at.
week?
No,
No, I said
every
every new investor should look at income and appreciation. In my mind, they don't necessarily go together, right? It depends on what you're trying to do. So I'll give you an example. If you're trying to build, a portfolio for the future to pass along, appreciation is super important, right? You want to find a place that's going to appreciate, because there are certain locations throughout the country that you will buy and your home value will never go up. Right. That's a fact. I know we always think home values go up and you hear the clips online, but there's certain places where
Stop talking.
there's no,
I just told you
there's
I'm
no,
kid.
so you have to find a place where there's appreciation. On the other hand, if you're buying in a very low income, poverty-stricken neighborhood, that shouldn't be about appreciation unless there's some plans that you see where they're going to develop. In that case, you focus on income, right? You get in there, you buy it for super cheap, you focus on getting the income out of there, you do enough to the property to make sure that it's livable and you're treating people well, and you're just pulling that income out, right? That's the income play, right? And if you find a sweet spot, you can do both, right? But you should think about what lane you want to go in, because that's going to dictate the area that you're investing in as well as the price point. So hopefully that all makes sense.
It does make sense. So I guess for a new investor who's starting off and wants to do an income play and also, what was the second word? Accumulation. Who wants to do both? Like, what area would you recommend for them now?
So if you're trying to do income and appreciation play wrapped in one, I'll be very honest, it's going to cost you a little more money, right? Because those are the areas that are development is happening. That's where people want to live. So if you're in the New York area, New York tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, all of those places, the taxes are extremely high, right? So I would say be very mindful of places where taxes are high. You're going to get appreciation, but you're not going to make as much income unless you're doing a multifamily. And when I say multifamily, like, a 3-unit, 4-unit, single families up here, they don't do well. Because it just costs so much money. So it can do well if you have the capital, but if you don't have the capital, it's really hard to do single families in these areas. But I would say places like Delaware, Philadelphia still has opportunities. Connecticut definitely has opportunities. Connecticut is a weird place though. You have to do your research because there's a lot of towns in some of these places that were what you call industrial towns. And I'll use Waterbury as an example because I know that town really well. It used to be an industrial area. So for a long time, there was just no growth, right? And yeah, so I would definitely say look at Connecticut. The price points are a lot cheaper. You can get in, you can make good income. Also look at Section 8. I like Section 8. I know some people say they don't. But again, you can choose what tenants you want. You don't have to just accept who you get. But Waterbury is a place where for years there was nothing going on, right? Things were abandoned buildings. And now you're starting to see the shift, right? Where people are starting to move back to Waterbury. There's development that's happening, right? And you don't want to get in when development is at its peak, right? You want to get in when it's first starting. So a gem for all new investors, every major city or small town has an urban development sort of office. If
Mhm.
you go to that office, they will show you their plans for 5 and 10 years out. And those plans are so important because it's going to literally tell you what they're trying to do. Now, does it always happen at the same time frame? No. But when you see that, then you can be like, okay, you know what? All right, Waterbury's, they're starting to build up. This is what they're trying to do. The neighboring towns are doing this. So there's a place for people to live, there's proximity to work, the schools are getting better, right? And there's industry there, right? So it's really important to do that, especially from an
So there are
appreciation
many
standpoint.
Waterburys in different states, right? So
Oh
what
yeah.
would cause you? You did share some keys, but specifically, what would you look into? Because it sounded like a couple of years ago you might not have felt like it was worth it. Now it might be something to look into. So what did you feel, biases aside, uh, one of your beloved frat brothers who found success aside, how would you have gone about timing that and trying to figure it out?
Uh, so Waterbury specifically, that was just a missed opportunity for me. I'll be very straight, right? I had the opportunity to buy a 6 unit in Waterbury. One of my good friends, he lives in Waterbury, lived there for years. Um, and for him, I was like, cool, if I buy the 6 unit where he's living, I can rent it to him. He can be the landlord. Everything will work out. But there were so many other abandoned buildings around, and I allowed my emotions to get involved versus just
Mhm.
following, the plan that I set for, right? Where it's like, hey, go look and see what they're doing in the town. Look at the 5 year plan, look at the 10 year plan. And I did that, but I was like, this looking like this might take 20 years. And I wasn't willing to sit on something for that long and it not have any appreciation. So for me personally, I only focus on appreciation plays. I don't really care about income plays because income plays tend to take more work, right? You have to keep the tenants happy. You have to do things. Appreciation plays, in my mind, are a little simpler to sort of manage day to day. But those are the big things. To use one other example, for New Jersey people, there's a place called Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey is like the bottom of the bottom, right? Of like communities across the country, not just New Jersey, right? So it's weird because New Jersey is one of the wealthiest states in the country, but yet Camden is one of the poorest districts in the country. The only thing that's there in Camden is they have a really nice waterfront. But as you can see, there's been a lot of waterfront development everywhere across the country, right? So you're like, okay, let's look at Camden, let's see what can happen. And I've been trying to find deals, but investors, the big investors, the hedge funds, they're already in there. They already saw what was happening. But what's happening now is they're looking to bring a sports team
Ah.
over from Philadelphia, right? That alone spurs so much development in the area that home prices literally are just going through the roof now. They shot up, right? But again, I have the model, but trying to apply that model, sometimes I get lost with emotions. So as an investor coming in for the first time, you got to try to leave your emotions out of it, and it's hard to do that. But just look at the
Mhm.
numbers, right? Look at the data that you're collecting, and then execute solely on that. And like I said, it's a lot easier said than done because I still wrestle with that quite a bit myself. So.
Okay, so it sounds like what's for you will always be for you and you'll be comfortable moving forward, but every once in a while you just have to jump and take the shot. Um, okay, that
Yeah.
is so
Um,
good.
Yeah, and I'll leave with this last gem. As an investor, always look at how you progress year over year. Most people are worried about doing things because they feel like, oh, something's going to go wrong. But then every year, the average person is doing better every single year. And when you look back, you're like, man, I could have just bought that because I made more money the following year, right?
Yeah.
That I did better, right? So it's really evaluating how you're doing year over year so you can see the picture and just believe in yourself a little more per se.
Okay. So ending question, I think you touched upon it about it earlier, but just so that we could make a clip out of it, is what does generational wealth mean to you?
Oh, awesome. That's a good question. So for me, generational wealth doesn't necessarily mean making sure my kids are just like wealthy and rich and they just have all of this money. For me, it's about creating options, right? It's about what money can do for you, not necessarily about having the money. I want my kids to be able to graduate and say, hey, I want to go to college or I don't want to go to college. And I know educators are going to scream at me, but it's all about creating options. So generational wealth is saying, hey, I leave something, you take what I leave, you don't live off of that thing I left, you live off of the interest and the
Mm,
income that produces, and you allow that thing to just last on forever, and every generation after lives off the interest. But you have to make deposits, right? So if you deposit into the box keeps growing, and you only take out the interest or the income related to that. You never take out the principal. So for me, that's generational wealth, building that box big enough to where my kids, their kids, they still feel the impact of it. And it's never a question of, hey, I want to go to Columbia. I did well and I can't afford to pay for it. Or, I want to buy my first home and I can't afford to pay for it. It's super big to me to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's sort of what I practice in this space.
that's deep. That's
Yeah.
good. So, are you actively teaching your kids like these principles? And if you are, how are you going about that?
Yeah, so it's funny. If you talk to my son, he would tell you he owns homes, right? Uh, I do take my son with me. So I have a son and a daughter. My daughter's 17. My son is 8. I take my son to me, and he's involved in every single business that I do.
Mm,
So he can see it, he's aware of it. Sometimes it's a little much, but what happens is kids tend to soak up things. So he can tell you about what real estate is. He can tell you how we make money in real estate. He can also even tell you how to evaluate a deal at a very high level, not looking at numbers, right? But just looking at the community and, like I said, all of the things that are going on. He can
yeah,
pinpoint all of those, which is great. So the idea is that as he gets older, if it's something he wants to do, he knows how to. And if it's not something he wants to do, he still knows how to manage the portfolio that's left. My daughter, on the other hand, she's not really into real estate, but she's involved in everything else, right? So it's super important to me. And this is super important for parents. Let your kids know how much money you make, let them see the numbers. Just have a conversation and say, hey, what we're talking about is private, it's a family thing. But it's super important because growing up, I didn't know how much money my parents made. I didn't know what bills were paid. I didn't know any of that. So my daughter, she knows my entire portfolio. She can account for every single dime and where it's at. Does she understand all of it? No. But she can tell you if something happened to me tomorrow, she's like, hey, listen, I know how much money he has and where the money's at. Right. And that's super important because it changes their mindset and they start to understand things and see things through a very different lens. And I would say as a parent, that's super important. And nowadays, my son is like, hey, listen, I have a certain level of expectation, and sometimes it backfires a little bit, but I love to see that he has a standard and he won't waver from that standard, right? And it's amazing to see kids because they don't care what other people think as much, right? So
that's
he's like, listen, I need to be first class and VIP for everything. But that standard now he knows, hey, I need to work to make sure I can maintain that standard on a go forward basis. Yeah.
That's good. That's good and that's real because growing up, my mom used to actually make me her little assistant. So she used to make me back in the day when they make you write out checks, I would have to write out the bills. So as a teenager, when all my friends are like, "Oh, I can't wait to move out," I used to be like, "Do you know how much this is? Do you know how much that bill costs? Do you know what electricity?" Like I was definitely more aware, and it definitely helped me in growing. So I love that tip that you shared. So to close out, where can people find you? Like, do you have an Instagram? Are you you on social or are you more private?
So I'm on social, but I really don't post any. If you saw me on social, you wouldn't know anything that I was doing because I don't
Okay.
post.
All right, so we'll leave
Um,
it.
it's not that I'm not sort of like that private guy that won't share. I'm one of those guys, if someone reaches out to me, I'll share everything for free, right?
Yeah,
But I am on social media at Askia, AskiAAQ on Instagram. So like if people really do have questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to people. But I I'm shy in a lot of ways. So like going down like the IG or social media influencer route, um, I get very sort of self-aware and stuff like that, but I'm happy
I
to talk to
understand.
people.
I hear you. I hear you. I'm the same way. I don't even know how I ended up doing this. So it's growing through it, growing pains, I guess. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think Gavin lost connection, but it was a pleasure hearing you speak, and your insights is definitely awesome. And we can't wait to have you again on another interview. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Definitely excited to come back because I definitely have some other things I want to discuss with you guys beyond the first property. So looking forward to it.
I know. Every time you're about to go off check, I was like, let him Gavin. And Gavin's like, nah, nah, reeling you in, but good. Thank you.